Templar-style control didn't start with knights in armor. It started with a Greek cult that hijacked the most sacred oracle in the ancient world and used it to engineer a war between two entire civilizations. Today, I'm breaking down every single Templar Rite in Assassin's Creed history, what they believed, how they operated, and how they fell, starting with the one that corrupted ancient Greece from the inside out, the cult of Cosmos. The cult of Cosmos worshipped a deity called Cosmos and operated throughout Greece during the 5th century BCE, right in the middle of the Peloponnesian War. And they weren't just watching the war unfold, they were running it. The cult controlled Greece through 7 distinct branches, with members embedded in Spartan military command, Athenian political circles, and everywhere in between. But the real power move was the Pythia. The Oracle of Delphi, the single most trusted voice in all of ancient Greece, was a puppet. Every prophecy, every divine revelation filtered through cult propaganda. If the oracle told you to go to war, you went to war, and the cult was writing the script. Here's where it gets complicated. The leader of all of this, the ghost of Cosmos, was Aspasia of Miletus. Publicly, she was the most cultured woman in Athens, partner of Pericles, intellectual heavyweight. Privately, she was running a shadow government that had both Athens and Sparta compromised before the first spear was ever thrown. It took Cassandra systematically hunting down every single member across all 7 branches to finally end it. Every sage, every politician hiding behind a mask. She dismantled the entire organization piece by piece until only Aspasia remained. But the cult of Cosmos was just one flavor of ancient conspiracy. The real predecessor to the Templars had already been operating for nearly 1,000 years before the cult even formed. The Order of the Ancients. Every single Templar Rite you've ever encountered in this franchise traces back to one guy, one pharaoh. In 1334 BCE, Smenkhkar founded the Order of the Ancients with a single obsession: find Isu technology, worship the beings who made it, and use their power to rebuild a golden age on Earth. That's it. That's the mission statement that launched over 2,000 years of conspiracy, war, and control. One man looked at alien artifacts and thought, I can make this everyone's problem. And he did. The order didn't stay buried in Egypt. By the 5th century BCE, they had infiltrated the Achaemenid Empire so thoroughly that they were pulling strings behind consecutive emperors, including Darius I and Xerxes I. Military, religious, political structures all compromised. They weren't advising kings. They were wearing them like puppets. But here's the thing. The Order of the Ancients didn't go out in some dramatic final battle. It rotted, slowly. As Abrahamic religions replaced polytheistic Isu worship across the ancient world, the Order's entire theological foundation crumbled beneath it. Fewer people wanted to worship ancient alien gods when Christianity was offering a simpler deal. The last remnants in Britain were hunted down by Ivor around 878 CE, which should have been the end of the story. It wasn't. King Alfred of Wessex took what was left of the order, stripped out the Isu worship, wrapped it in Christian doctrine, and reformed it into something new, something that would survive another 1,000 years. The Order of the Ancients didn't die, it evolved. And that evolution is exactly what created the Templars as we know them, starting with their most iconic incarnation, the Levantine Templars. The entire Third Crusade was a treasure hunt. Thousands of soldiers marching across the Holy Land, bleeding and dying for God and country, and the guys running the show were actually looking for alien technology buried under Solomon's temple, which is, not ideal. Between 1189 and 1192, 9 leading Templars coordinated a covert search for the Apple of Eden, while the rest of the crusade raged around them as convenient cover. Grand Master Robert de Sablé positioned the entire military campaign as a framework for artifact recovery, using the fog of holy war to mask what was really a piece of Eden retrieval operation. Nobody questions why knights are digging through ancient ruins when there's a crusade happening. That's just called being thorough. But here's where the conspiracy gets genuinely unsettling. The 9 Templar leaders didn't just include Knights Templar. The Grand Masters of the Knights Hospitaller and the Knights Teutonic, supposedly rival military orders, were secretly among the 9. These organizations that publicly competed with each other, that had their own agendas and loyalties, were all answering to the same Shadow Council. The entire Crusader military apparatus was compromised from the top down. Altair systematically assassinated all 9 of them and recovered the apple before the Templars could secure it. But killing the leadership didn't kill the organization. De Sablé's successor, Armand Bouchard, immediately relocated operations to Cyprus, attempting to rebuild from the Mediterranean. Altair tracked him there too and put a blade in him, but Bouchard had already shipped the Templar treasury off the island before he died, so the man lost his life but saved the war chest. Every coin preserved for future reorganization. That 9-member council structure, by the way, became the Templar standard for centuries. And the resources Bouchard smuggled out, they didn't just disappear. They funded what came next, and what came next involved an underground city and a very angry group of Byzantine loyalists, the Ottoman Templars. Most Templar Rites lost a war and regrouped somewhere else. The Byzantine Templars lost their entire civilization and decided to move underground, literally underground. After Constantinople fell to the Ottomans in 1453, the remnants of the Byzantine Templar Rite retreated into the subterranean city of Derinkuyu in Cappadocia and kept going. For decades, they operated in the shadows, biding their time until the events of Revelations in 1511. These people chose to live beneath the earth for over half a century rather than abandon their cause. Derinkuyu wasn't some makeshift bunker either. It was a full underground city, complete with training facilities, artifact storage, and enough infrastructure to sustain an entire organizational hierarchy without ever seeing sunlight. New recruits were brought in, trained in the dark, and indoctrinated with one singular purpose. And here's the thing. Their philosophical pitch was actually pretty compelling on the surface. They weren't framing themselves as power-hungry conspirators. They were the last guardians of a displaced Christian civilization, loyalists to a fallen empire who refused to let Byzantine culture die. Restoring Constantinople wasn't just a military objective, it was a sacred duty. That kind of conviction doesn't fade after a decade, it hardens over generations. The Byzantine Templars maintained networks of sympathizers embedded within Ottoman administrative and military structures, feeding intelligence back to Derinkuyu, while the Ottoman Empire carried on completely unaware that an entire Templar command was operating beneath their feet. They stockpiled Isu artifacts, trained operatives in total darkness, and planned their resurgence with the patience of people who genuinely believed they had all the time in the world. Then Ezio Auditore showed up and dismantled the whole thing. Decades of careful planning, an entire hidden city's worth of infrastructure, and one Italian assassin with Ottoman allies walked in and tore it apart. Some splinter groups survived to feed into later Templar operations, but the Byzantine Rite as a coherent organization was finished. All that patience, all that fanaticism, gone. Which is, not ideal. But if the Byzantine Templars were defined by patience and conviction, the next rite was defined by something far more dangerous: ambition with zero restraint. The Italian Rite. The literal pope was a Templar Grand Master. Let that sink in for a second. The most powerful religious figure on earth, the man who supposedly spoke for God, was secretly running an organization dedicated to stripping humanity of its free will using alien technology. And nobody knew. The Italian Rite was controlled by 3 powerful families: the Pazzi, the Barbarigo, and most prominently, the Borgia. Rodrigo Borgia clawed his way to the top of the Templar hierarchy as Grand Master, and then, because that apparently wasn't enough, he also became Pope Alexander VI. So now you've got one guy wielding the spiritual authority of the entire Catholic Church and the conspiratorial machinery of the Templar Order simultaneously, which is, not ideal for anyone who enjoys having thoughts of their own. But here's where it gets complicated. Rodrigo didn't even care about the Templar mission. Not really. His son Cesare ran the military. His daughter Lucrezia handled diplomacy. The entire operation was just a vehicle for Borgia family power. They treated the order like a family business, which, to be fair, it basically was at that point. The grand ideological crusade for humanity's future, replaced by how do we get more land and more money for the Borgias. Rodrigo eventually tried to hoard an apple of Eden entirely for himself, betraying even his own organization's goals. The Italian Rite didn't just rot from the outside, it rotted from the guy sitting in the big chair. Enter Ezio Auditore, who spent over 30 years of his life systematically tearing the whole thing apart. He assassinated their generals, recovered the Apple of Eden, and dismantled Borgia power base by base until the Italian Rite was effectively finished by the early 1500s. 3 decades of work to undo what one corrupt family built. That's dedication. But at least the Borgias kept their scheming to one continent. The Templars who set up shop in the Caribbean had much bigger ambitions and a much stranger target, the West Indies Rite. Most Templar rites are founded by shadowy figures operating behind the scenes. The West Indies Rite was founded by the actual governor of Cuba. Laureano de Torres y Ayala wasn't hiding in some underground bunker. He was running an entire colony in broad daylight while simultaneously building the Templar Order's first major foothold in the Western Hemisphere. And here's the thing. Torres wasn't interested in gold or land. He wanted the observatory, an ancient Isu installation buried in Long Bay, Jamaica, capable of surveilling literally anyone on Earth. Not a sword that controls minds, not an apple that bends wills. A building that lets you watch every single person on the planet whenever you want. That's not a piece of Eden. That's a piece of Eden on steroids. The Templars went from chasing shiny artifacts to pursuing infrastructure for global omniscience, which is, not ideal. For over 2 decades, Torres operated under the guise of legitimate Spanish colonial administration, infiltrating pirate crews, merchant guilds, and military installations across the Caribbean. The man controlled the most valuable trade zone in the world while secretly hunting for an alien surveillance camera. You have to respect the multitasking. But here's where it gets funny. The entire operation was ultimately dismantled by a drunk Welsh pirate who stumbled into the conspiracy by accident. Edward Kenway wasn't an assassin. He killed a man named Duncan Walpole, stole his clothes, and showed up to a Templar meeting pretending to be him because he heard there was money involved. That's the origin story. And somehow, this absolute disaster of a human being infiltrated the observatory in 1722 and killed Torres, inside the very installation the Grand Master had spent his entire career searching for. 20 years of meticulous planning ended by a pirate who originally just wanted a nice coat and some coin. Torres died in the one room he'd dreamed about his whole life. Poetry doesn't get much darker than that, but if the Caribbean Templars had ambitious plans for the New World, they were nothing compared to what came next on the American continent. The colonial rite. Haytham Kenway is one of the most fascinating characters in the entire franchise, because for the first 3 hours of Assassin's Creed 3, you genuinely believe you're playing as an assassin. You're not. You're building the Templar Order from scratch in the New World. In 1754, the British Rite dispatched Haytham to North America to search for Isu sites, and instead of just poking around and reporting back, he established the first permanent colonial rite hierarchy out of New York City, turning scattered Templar operatives into a coordinated machine. But here's where the colonial rite separated itself from every other branch we've talked about. They didn't just fight the assassins, they turned one. Shay Cormac was a full-blown member of the Colonial Brotherhood who became so disillusioned with the assassins' reckless pursuit of Isu sites after accidentally triggering a catastrophic earthquake in Lisbon that killed tens of thousands that he defected entirely. The Templars weaponized him. Shay led a systematic campaign that eliminated nearly every colonial assassin, reducing the Brotherhood to basically one old man in a crumbling manor, which is, not ideal if you're an assassin. And Haytham wasn't done being clever. During the American Revolution, he positioned Templar agents on both sides of the conflict. Loyalists and revolutionaries alike had Templars embedded in their ranks. It didn't matter who won the war. The Templars would benefit either way. That level of strategic hedging is almost admirable if it weren't so deeply sinister. Then the tragedy kicks in. Connor Kenway, Retin Hanaki-Tun, Haytham's own son, joined the Assassin Brotherhood and dedicated himself to dismantling everything his father built. A Templar Grandmaster killed by his own child fighting for the opposing ideology. That's not just a video game plot, that's Shakespeare with tomahawks. Haytham died, but here's the kicker. The colonial rite didn't die with him. It survived the revolution and rebranded as the American Rite. Connor killed the man, he didn't kill the machine, but if you think the Templars manipulating one revolution was impressive, wait until you see what they pulled off in France, the French Rite. Francois Thomas Germain might be the single most important Templar in the entire Assassin's Creed franchise, and nobody gives him enough credit for it. Not because he was the strongest or most ruthless, but because his ideas literally built the modern order. Every corporate boardroom, every Abstergo subsidiary, every suit-wearing Templar agent in the modern day exists because of what this man set in motion in 18th century Paris. Here's the thing about Germain. He wasn't just a grand master, he was a sage, a reincarnation of the Yisu known as Aita, carrying memories from a civilization that predated humanity by thousands of years. And when he looked at the Templar Order of his era, he saw rot. The order had become fat and comfortable, propping up aristocrats who served their own interests, while the Templar mission stagnated. Germain believed the entire system needed to burn, so he burned it, literally. Germain engineered the French Revolution. He manipulated economic conditions and food supplies across France, manufacturing mass starvation that would drive a nation to the breaking point. Then he gave them someone to blame, the aristocracy. Enter Maximilien de Robespierre, a provincial lawyer with radical ideas and zero awareness that he was a Templar puppet from day one. During the 9-month reign of terror, Robespierre's government arrested approximately 300,000 people and executed roughly 40,000 of them, all to prove a single philosophical point. Because the revolution wasn't about liberation, it was a conditioning experiment. Flood a society with so much chaos that the population begs for authoritarian control just to make it stop. Create the disease, then sell the cure. But Germain's real innovation was what came after. He argued that controlling kings was obsolete. Why own a monarch who can be overthrown when you can control the financial systems every government depends on? Replace thrones with boardrooms. Let people think they're free while you own everything they need to survive. That single ideological shift is the direct blueprint for Abstergo Industries. He didn't just run a Rite, he redesigned the entire order's playbook for the next 2 centuries, which is, not a bad legacy for a silversmith who talked to dead Isu in his head. But if the French Rite showed what happens when Templars weaponize ideology, the British Rite proved what happens when they weaponize industry itself. The British Rite. This is the oldest continuously organized Templar Rite in the entire franchise, and nobody gives it the credit it deserves. While other rites rose and fell like dominoes, the British Rite has been running since roughly 878 CE, when King Alfred of Wessex took the shattered Order of the Ancients and rebuilt them under a Christian framework. That's over 1,000 years of unbroken operation. And by the time Crawford Starrick took the reins as Grand Master in the mid-19th century, the British Rite didn't just influence London, it owned it, not figuratively, literally. Starrick's Industries had its fingers in every major commercial, governmental, and criminal enterprise in the city. Parliament, Templar-influenced, the police, compromised, the street gangs, a Templar outfit called the Blighters, operating as Starrick's personal enforcers. He didn't need an Apple of Eden or some ancient Isu superweapon, he just needed capitalism and a complete absence of morality, which is, not ideal. And here's where it stops being abstract conspiracy and starts being genuinely awful. Starrick's apparatus ran on child labor, kids working in Templar-controlled factories, producing the wealth that funded his empire. That's not some vague order through control philosophy. That's children being ground into profit margins so one man can own a city. Cool. Add that to the list, but the thing about building your empire on exploited people is that those people tend to get angry when someone finally hands them a weapon. Enter Jacob and Evie Fry. Instead of the usual lone wolf assassination campaign, Jacob went straight to London's underworld and built the Rooks, a gang designed to fight the Blighters on their own turf. Evie targeted Templar leadership directly. It was a 2-front war, and Starrick's system crumbled because it depended on one thing he never accounted for: the people he was exploiting choosing to fight back. Starrick came closer to total urban dominion than arguably any other Grandmaster in history, and he lost it all because 2 20-something assassins gave his victims a reason to stop being passive. But if Victorian London was a masterclass in Templar control, wait until you see what the Order pulled off in Russia, because that one reshaped an entire continent. The Russian Rite. Most Templar rites start with a bang. A Grand Master seizes power, builds an empire, and then an assassin shows up and ruins everything. The Russian Rite didn't work like that. The Russian Rite played the longest game in Templar history, and it actually won. And then it lost anyway, which is honestly the funniest possible outcome for an organization obsessed with control. Templar connections to Russian leadership stretch back to the 16th century through Ivan Ivanovich, son of Tsar Ivan the Terrible. But the Rite didn't consolidate real power until the late Russian Empire, when it began embedding itself into every layer of imperial governance: military leadership, aristocratic circles, administrative bureaucracy, the usual Templar playbook. But here's where it gets interesting. When the October Revolution hit in 1917, the Russian Right picked both sides. They maintained agents within the imperial military while simultaneously embedding operatives within the Bolsheviks under Lenin. Regardless of who won, the Templars had people in the room. That's not hedging your bets. That's owning the casino. The real kicker comes after Lenin's death in 1924. Joseph Stalin was secretly controlled by the Templars. Stalin, a Templar puppet, the gulags, the purges, the absolute suffocation of individual freedom across the entire Soviet Union. That was the Templar dream made real. Total state control over every citizen, every institution, every thought. No other right in history actually achieved the endgame. The Russian Right did, and then it fell apart. Here's the thing nobody talks about. The Russian Right wasn't destroyed by assassins. No hooded figure climbed through a window and stabbed a grandmaster. The Right eroded because totalitarianism is inherently self-destructive. The same mechanisms of absolute control that protected Templar interests prevented the flexibility needed to adapt when the system started cracking. By 1991, the Soviet Union collapsed under its own weight, and the Russian Right collapsed with it. They built the perfect prison and then locked themselves inside. Every other right on this list got taken down by an assassin with a blade and a grudge. The Russian Right proved that even if the Templars get everything they want, the thing they want doesn't work, which is, not ideal for an organization chasing that exact outcome for 3,000 years. But if the Russian Right showed what happens when Templars win through government, the American Right took notes and chose a completely different path. The American Right. Every other right on this list has a moment, a dramatic fall, a Grand Master bleeding out on the floor while an assassin stands over them. The American Right doesn't have that. And that's exactly what makes it the scariest one. After American independence, the colonial right didn't collapse. It just changed its name. The same organizational infrastructure that Haytham Kenway built, the same networks, the same ambitions, all of it carried over seamlessly into the newly independent nation. And then it grew, rapidly. Throughout the 19th century, the American right embedded itself into every major power structure the country had to offer. The executive branch, the legislative branch, intelligence agencies, military command, major financial institutions, industrial corporations. If it had influence, the Templars were inside it. The Civil War, Reconstruction, America's rise as a global superpower, all of these events played out with Templar fingerprints somewhere in the machinery, not always steering the wheel directly, but always close enough to nudge it. But here's where it gets really interesting. Remember Germain's vision from the French Revolution? The idea that Templar power shouldn't flow through kings and governments, but through capitalism and corporate control. The American Right is the one that actually finished that job. They took Germain's blueprint and built something he could only dream about. Abstergo Industries, a multinational corporate front so massive, so embedded in global commerce that it made traditional governmental infiltration look quaint by comparison. Why bother corrupting a senator when you can own the company that funds his campaign, employs his constituents, and manufactures the products in his house? And unlike the French Right, which burned itself out in revolutionary chaos, or the British Right, which got dismantled by two twins with a grudge, the American Right just kept compounding. No assassin revolution toppled it. No single blade ended its reign. The American Brotherhood has chipped away at it for centuries, sure, taking out individual operatives, disrupting specific operations, but the structure itself, still standing, still growing, still the most powerful Templar organization on Earth heading into the 21st century, which is, not ideal, but the American Right's greatest achievement isn't political influence or military reach. It's what they built to replace all of that. A corporation so powerful, it doesn't need governments anymore. And that corporation deserves its own conversation. Abstergo Industries. Every Templar organization we've covered had the same fatal flaw. They were run by people who could be stabbed, poisoned, overthrown, or simply outlived. The Order of the Ancients died with its pharaohs. The Borgias collapsed when Ezio put a blade through the right necks. The colonial right crumbled when a father and son couldn't stop trying to kill each other. But in 1937, the Templars finally solved that problem. They built something you can't assassinate. A corporation, Abstergo Industries was officially founded as a pharmaceutical company, which is already the most Templar sentence ever written. But behind the lab coats and shareholder meetings, it was the culmination of 3,000 years of trial and error. Every lesson from every fallen rite, every collapsed empire, every dead Grand Master, distilled into a single form that doesn't need a king, doesn't need a pope, and doesn't need to hide. It just needs quarterly earnings. Here's what makes Abstergo the scariest Templar entity in the entire franchise. It's partially legitimate. The corporation genuinely develops technology, genuinely produces pharmaceuticals, genuinely employs thousands of people who have zero idea they're working for a 3-millennium-old conspiracy. Every previous rite had to pretend their control was for humanity's benefit. Abstergo doesn't have to pretend. It sells you products. It entertains you. It files taxes, but the endgame was never profit margins. Abstergo's ultimate objective was launching pieces of Eden into orbit, creating a satellite network capable of global mind control. A pharaoh worshipping alien gods in 1334 BCE started an ideological chain that, over 33 centuries, led to a pharmaceutical company putting mind control satellites in space. That's the Templar pipeline, from temples to thrones to corporate boardrooms to literal orbital weapons platforms. In 2012, the satellite launch was disrupted. Turns out no, that wasn't the end. Abstergo simply pivoted, shifted resources toward cultural influence, entertainment media, data collection, because that's the thing about corporations. You kill a grandmaster, the rite falls apart. You disrupt a product launch, the company releases a press statement and moves on to the next fiscal quarter. And that's the real horror of Abstergo. It's the conspiracy that became so powerful it went public and nobody noticed. 3,000 years of secret warfare, and the final form isn't a hidden temple or an underground city. It's a logo on a building you walk past every day without looking up. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now.